FSU can suck my whole ass. They get their doors blown off of them by Georgia in the Orange Bowl.
They had Bobby Boucher out there at middle linebacker.
Come out week 0, look like butt cheeks.
What is going on, everybody? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Morningwood. I'm Matthew, and I'm here with my good friend Jason. This is a sports show hosted by two idiots, and today, guys, we get to finally talk about football that mattered. Football that mattered actually happened yesterday, and we are going to talk about it. FSU took on Georgia Tech and lost. They fall to Georgia Tech 24-21 in the season opener. Interesting game, and we are going to jump right into it. Jason, what are your takeaway, your thoughts on the game? What are the key notes you got for what worked for Georgia Tech, what didn't work clearly for FSU, and if you want to break that down?
Yeah, so I put on my Miami hat today because FSU can suck my whole ass. That's why. But let me just real quick, before we break down the Georgia Tech FSU game, I just want to run through the timeline of FSU starting from last season. So they went undefeated last season. Congrats. Great accomplishment. Jordan Travis gets hurt, and because of that, the committee doesn't put them in the college football playoff, which most people agreed with, other than FSU fans. They get their doors blown off of them by Georgia in the Orange Bowl, 63-3. Continue to complain that they weren't in the college football playoff. In the offseason, they have players go to the NFL, but overall had a good offseason with the transfer portal. Come out week 0, look like butt cheeks, and lose to Georgia Tech week 0. Not even week 1, week 0, they lose.
Week 0 is crazy.
FSU football might actually be dead now. Like, Georgia Tech just killed them.
I mean, they had a good run. I think it was a great season.
It was a great season. It was a good first drive, and then good season. Like, that was the highlight of your season, was the very first drive of week 0. But going into the actual game, some key points that I wanted to break down from FSU side of the ball and some Georgia Tech stuff. So highlighting that, like, things that stood out to me, FSU's situational offensive play calling was horrible. The offense did not get into any rhythm. They had one good drive, which was the first drive, which they ran the ball really well. And then the drive to tie the game in the fourth quarter, where they spread the offense out, they had to score quick. That drive looked pretty good. But other than those two drives, they couldn't do anything. DJU looked indecisive. The line really didn't help him out either, the offensive line. The pocket was collapsing for most of his dropbacks. He started the game, interesting stat here, he started the game 12 for 14. He had negative total air yards on those 12 completions.
That's crazy.
Which is not great if you want to throw the ball down the field and actually get some yards. But I do want to give credit to Georgia Tech because they showed up in a big way. It wasn't just FSU just not like really playing well. They controlled pretty much the entire game other than those two drives, like I said. Haynes King made some huge plays on third down. I think the Georgia Tech defensive line didn't get enough credit. They were pushing the O-line back on every play. But those are the main things that stood out to me. Matt, I'm interested to see what you got to say about the game.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of your notes there. I should have, honestly, I feel like we and everybody should have known that Georgia Tech was going to win that game when on like the first or second series, they had Bobby Boucher out there at middle linebacker.
Yeah,
I should have known immediately that they were taking that home. One of the first key points I want to talk about is FSU. It seemed like they were getting themselves into a lot of third downs and a lot of like second and long and third and longs, which they had to convert. And like you said, their offense wasn't flowing or meshing to push the ball down the field to convert those. And they constantly were behind the sticks or not. Just they didn't get a lot of like big explosive plays or any sort of pressure off of them to execute on probably what they had for second and long or third and long on the play calling. But the biggest thing, I think the biggest reason this game ended up the way that it did was Georgia Tech controlling the offensive line and defensive line of scrimmage. They set the tone early, and they basically controlled where that line of scrimmage was. If they were on defense, they were pushing it back. If they were on offense, I mean, there was a couple runs or I don't want to say last night, but yesterday that, I mean, whether it was King or the running back, they had like 3-4 yards before they even got touched by a FSU defender. And that is demoralizing when they, just are constantly having play after play, long drive. It will take a lot out of a defense. So the line of scrimmage was definitely the eye-opening thing to notice in that game. Also, like you said, the play calling for FSU was questionable and strange. Late in the fourth quarter, they had I think it was a 2nd and long. They were in the shotgun and they ran like a sweep to the left, which was like a short side of the field play. It made no sense to me.
Yeah, that was like 2nd and long, I think, right?
They needed, like, they had nothing offensively. They had no identity. They had no momentum. They had nothing, and they run a sweep to the left for like 3 yards on like a 2nd and long, and it just seemed like between DJ, the offensive coordinator, or play calling from the head coach, whoever it is, they just didn't seem like they were really prepared or flowing at all. And that's another thing. Like, at Georgia Tech came out, probably heard all the talk, heard all the noise about, oh, well, FSU's on a revenge tour and this and that. And they came prepared. They came ready to play. They looked like they were ready for the football game, where FSU, on the other hand, didn't look, they just look lackluster a lot. But I just give credit to Georgia Tech's coaching staff. They came out, they handled business, and did something that I think a lot of people were not really expecting or ready for. But overall, I mean, kudos to them. They played great. Like we said, like the offensive line. I mean, their D line, their front seven was everywhere. Bobby Boucher, it felt like he had like 15 tackles in the first half alone. And I think they just did enough necessary plays, especially with King, to get those crucial 3rd down plays, or get those crucial we need a play here type plays, and FSU did not execute on those. But overall, I think like it just was a game that we weren't expecting. I didn't really expect FSU to come out that flat. And again, kudos to Georgia Tech for taking home week 1 victory like that. That's impressive.
Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention about the highlights, I didn't write it down, but I was remembering it as you were saying it. The missed tackles from FSU were pretty apparent. Like when they did get into the backfield, like the Haynes King must have put like baby oil all over himself before the game, because they could not even hold on to him. He would just break every tackle. Same with Haynes, the running back, as well.
Yeah, it seemed like every time Haynes broke the pocket, somebody got an arm on him, somebody got a hand on him, but he just continued to make play when needed. And yeah, I just think, I know the rain came in a little bit too, which probably had a little bit of a cause and effect on that. But overall, they came out flat.
It didn't affect Georgia Tech's defensive line, that's for sure.
It did not. Georgia Tech was, again, they were ready to play, man. Like they came out and they definitely looked prepared and wanted that game way more than FSU, in my opinion. And I think DJ and that offense, they really need to figure an identity out. It didn't look like they had any sort of like, okay, this is what FSU is going to bring, whether it was read option style, speed option, get the ball out, roll out, nothing. It was no deep pass, no run game. Like, it was a mix of everything, but nothing was really working. So, but just to piggyback off of the recap of the game, I remember last week I was high on FSU. I know a lot of other people were. I completely botched my prediction on FSU, which is a good start to the podcast, me going 0-1 on my takes so far. But yeah, I had FSU winning the ACC this year. I had them being probably what seemed like a top 6 team in the playoff this year. And for them to come out and pretty much lay a dog caca egg against Georgia Tech, I was wrong. And I'll admit when I'm wrong throughout the year, because that was way off.
You weren't the only one. I mean, they were the favorites to win the ACC coming into the season. So
interested to see what FSU looks like moving forward from here on the rest of the season. I know there is 12 teams, which allows a little bit more room for maybe some losses. But overall, let's look at FSU's future here. Jason, what do you think is the biggest key on FSU's future? Excuse me. Do you think it's like season's over, season's done, or they have hope? Again, a field goal to win it, loss like that week 1 with all that expectation, all that promise. revenge tour, all that. After that loss, do you think it's, again, season done? Do you think they're coming back? What do you think?
So, like, the question is, can FSU make the playoffs? Like, of course they can. It's week 0, but it's not going to be easy. I don't think their strength of schedule, might, like, if they don't win the ACC, their strength of schedule might not be enough to get one of those like 6 to 8 seeds when you
Right.
have all the teams in the SEC, all the teams in the Big Ten who are going to have those type of schedules, who are
Yep.
going to like have maybe 2 or 3 losses. Do you look at a team that doesn't win? Like, if Ohio State wins the Big Ten, Oregon is going to have probably 2 or 3 losses as well. And
Yeah.
if it's FSU and Oregon looking at their schedules, who are you going to put into the playoff?
Right.
Like, you're going to put in Oregon. But I think they have to win the ACC to get into the playoff. They're going to have to beat Miami. They're going to have to beat Clemson
Yeah.
to get into the playoff. They go to SMU, which is not. I mean, SMU didn't look great week 0, but going to SMU is not going to be easy. So I think to get into the playoff, FSU has to win the ACC.
I agree. I think the problem for FSU is they just put a ton more pressure on them for the remaining of the season after the first game, which is not good. I just think, like, for FSU now, you have to look at like Miami, Clemson, and Virginia Tech the rest of the season. That's who they're banking on pretty much to not, like you said, if Miami or Clemson wins the ACC and Virginia Tech maybe surprises some people, has some big wins. If Clemson's good, that's not like Florida State has. I mean, that's not good at all. Like, they have really nothing to go for after that. I know you broke down some of the games or mentioned them, but if you want to quickly, let's like go through their
We can look at
schedule.
their schedule.
Yeah, so they have next week they play Boston College at home. Hopefully, that's a bounce back game. And then they have Memphis at home. That's an interesting game. A lot of these games that we're going to see too are what should be wins now after the Georgia Tech game are going to be like, well, we don't know. Like, what are they going to look like? But then they have a stretch which starts with Cal. They have Cal at home, and then, like you said, they go to SMU. I know we said that SMU didn't look great, but still, that's on the road. Then they have Clemson at home, Duke on the road, Miami on the road, and then North Carolina at home, and then they go to Notre Dame.
Yeah, that's a tough stretch.
That's a rough stretch for the pressure they put on themselves week 1. And again, a lot of those teams are ones that they kind of need to not do as well in the ACC, like a Clemson, like a Miami.
And even at Duke, it's a 7 p.m. game at Duke. It's going to be a night primetime game. It's not, I mean, obviously they should beat Duke, but that's not a give-me game. Like,
No.
they have to show up.
No, they definitely added those trap games now became increasingly more difficult and a lot more important. So they can't really take many weeks off at all. So, looking at the schedule, again, that stretch from Cal all the way to Notre Dame, that is rough. And they really, really got to figure out, again, some form of an offense identity and defensively, really. I mean, they like you said, like the running and just the line of scrimmage, like Georgia Tech really controlled the tone of that game, and they got to really figure themselves out. And again, the question is, will FSU make the playoffs? I think they have the capability of making it. I mean, players and coaching staff. It's just they have to really put the pieces together here down from week 2 all the way to the end. Because, go ahead.
No, I think if they lose 3 games, I don't think they get in.
I don't think they do either. Because again, like you said, there's going to be teams in the Big Ten, in the SEC, or in other conferences that, like, you have to think there's going to be teams that have 1 loss, maybe some undefeated teams this year. You never know. So again, they made that margin of error so much thinner than it needed to be after week 1. And
they have to beat Clemson and they have to beat Miami if they want to be in the playoff.
Yeah. Those are like must wins now, which are tough must wins, especially Miami's on the road, and then Clemson. Like, we don't know what they're going to look like, but again, that could be a tough team to play this year. So again, that's interesting. I think that's overall the take of the game was no one was really expecting that. Again, Georgia Tech, kudos to them, hats off to them. Huge week 1 victory, but man, FSU, a lot of question marks moving forward, and interesting to see how they bounce back, how they respond, and if it is just going to be a fold-up, collapse season. We'll see.
Yeah, so do you want to move on to this week we have some games on Thursday. I don't think we have any big games on Thursday, but we do have college football on Thursday, and then we have some picks for Saturday and the Sunday game, the top 25 game picks. We can run through those. Probably the biggest one of the weekend, Clemson at Georgia.
Yeah, that's probably going to be one of the better games we're going to see all season. Number 14 plays number 1 in Atlanta. Georgia coming off of last season. That's that's a big game for them. Week 1. That's a big game for both teams. I'm going to take Georgia in that game. I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be a pretty good game, but I think Georgia pulls away in the end. I think they just have the better coach and better players. So, what are your thoughts on that game?
I'm also going to take Georgia. I mean, they're going to come out week 1 and they're going to be ready. I mean, it's not obviously the typical week 1 game that like Clemson going. That's such a hard first game for Clemson as well. Yep. Going into Georgia might work out in FSU's favor. I know FSU obviously lost a ACC conference game, but I have Georgia winning that one.
Okay. And the second matchup we have is Penn State goes to West Virginia. Again, tough road game to start the season. Again, not a top 5 opponent or anything, but again, a tough game. But I do have Penn State winning this. I think that defense is going to be fun to watch this year, led by again my player to watch out for last week. So we'll see how that goes. But I do have Penn State winning that game.
I also have Penn State winning the game, but I think it's on like a last second field goal. Honestly, I think it's gonna be hard in Morgantown.
Next game we have is my team will be traveling to Florida week 1. A nice little rivalry game week 1. That's awesome. But I do have number 19 Miami winning that game. I think that's just going to be a gritty type game. The energy is going to be high. Anytime Florida State, Florida, or Miami play each other, it is always high energy. But I think we do take that game. I think we do come out on top.
So I actually have Florida winning this game at home. I think it's going to be hard for Miami. I think they're going to be fine afterwards, but Florida's going to be a tough place to play. I have Florida winning in a close one at home.
I like that.
Even though I have a Miami hat on right now, but it's
You're
fine.
Good. I mean, not every game is going to be, just the favorite to win it. So that's good. Next game we have is Notre Dame, number 7, goes to Texas A&M, the 12th man, number 20 Texas A&M. How do you feel about this game?
I'm actually going to take the Aggies at home as well. I think this is a tough matchup for Notre Dame. I think the Aggies can score the football. Yeah. So Notre Dame's going to have to – it's going to be a similar game type to FSU Georgia Tech. Like Notre Dame's going to want to come in, control the ball, control the football, run the football, and Texas A&M's going to want to open it up a little bit. But a tough place to go into and play. Give me the Aggies at home.
I like that pick because I have them as well. I think that Notre Dame, it seems like every year they get highly ranked, they get highly anticipated in expectations, and they just never amount to really meeting those expectations at all. I think they'll still be a good team because I do have them in the playoff bracket from last week that we made. But I do think that they come in and take the L against the Aggies on this one. So, and then finally, the last game we have, 23 USC goes down to the Bayou at LSU at number 13. What do you think about this game?
I think LSU wins big here. I really like their quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. But USC's defense was a huge problem last year.
Yep.
And I think LSU has a potent offense, and they can put up some big points against USC's defense.
Yeah, I have LSU winning this one as well. I think the loss to Caleb, I think a lot of the problems that they're going to find out is like when you lose a quarterback like that, it is very hard to replace them. I think USC is going to struggle finding an identity. I don't think they're going to be terrible. I think they'll, probably find their footing later on in the season, maybe mid-year, maybe towards even the end of the year. But we're going to talk and break down the matchup of the week we have, which is going to be Clemson versus Georgia. Number 14 versus number 1. That's one of the bigger ranked games if I can remember in a couple of years. So that's an awesome game. And to start off this game, I think the biggest key factors here are going to be probably who wins the line of scrimmage, similar to the Georgia Tech Florida State game. Whoever kind of controls the line of scrimmage of this game if you have plays made in the backfield, or if you're behind the sticks, I think both of these defense, but especially Georgia, you cannot get in second and long, third and long against this team. It is a rough time when that happens. So I think the offensive line and defensive line, which in my opinion, I think Georgia definitely wins both of those battles. They have too many good players. They probably now have the best coach in college football. So it's a tough place to play. They've dominated the last like 3 years. So it's a tough matchup for Clemson. But if they do want to win, if they do want to come out with a victory, they got to control that line of scrimmage. Those boys up front for Georgia are big. They know what they're doing. They're good players. So that's probably the biggest one. Speaking of Clemson's offense, I think if they can get creative, if they can get out of the run pass that a lot of teams do when they play better, opponents, it seems like when you feed into those plays, if they can minimize second and long and third and long again against this defense, they have a shot. But that's probably the biggest thing is letting their offense kind of get into a rhythm, get into a flow of things. And they should be coming out on top. And one of the main factors of that is going to be Clemson's run game. In the last 6 games last year, Phil Maffa had the most touchdowns in the country, and he was third in yards as a running back. So they're going to have to lean in on him to be successful in this game and kind of let him carry the load against that front seven of Georgia. And then on the flip side for Georgia, I think this is probably the biggest game for Carson Beck. He's coming off an SEC championship game where he had like 4 dropped interceptions from Bama. He didn't really play great. I know they were in that game, but if, Bama catches 2 or even 3 of those interceptions, I mean, they were like easy interceptions. I think they blow Georgia out last year. So this is a big game for him. He should come out and prove to the country that he's either the best quarterback in the country or one of in this game. I think Georgia needs to see that, especially the start from last year he had. That Georgia offense looked awful those first 2 games. I think they played like Ball State and somebody else, and they were barely winning or barely moving the football. It seemed like they just didn't mesh well. So had a whole offseason to kind of get comfortable in that offense. So, but I think this is a big game for Carson Beck to kind of show the country what he's all about and stuff. But for you guys, just some Georgia stats, some cool stats. Over the last 2 seasons, the last 3 seasons, they've only lost 2 games. And both of those were to Bama in the SEC championship game, which shows you how dominant this team has been under Kirby Smart over the last 3 seasons. And they've also won 39 consecutive regular season games, which is the second longest in the AP poll era, which is kind of insane. Any thoughts on this game so far, Jay?
So I think a big part of this game is, Clemson under Dabo is always going to have a good defense.
Yeah.
So their defense is going to need to show up. Like you were saying on the points for Carson Beck, he has to play well, and Clemson's defense needs to make him uncomfortable if they're going to win this football game. So I think a key for Clemson to win this game is their defense has to show up. They cannot let Georgia get into a rhythm, or they're not going to win this game.
Yeah, I agree. I think of the problem that Clemson kind of faces here too is the fact that Georgia, I feel like, has the caliber of team and coaching staff to, if they do drop this game, I wouldn't be shocked if they bounce back and still make the playoffs. No. But Clemson, it's more of like if they lose this, I know it's number 1 Georgia, but if you lose this and you got the rest of the season to look for, I think just Clemson has less of a chance to drop this one and bounce back and remain in the playoff hunt for the rest of the season, where I think Georgia has not only the players but the coaching staff to get that done. But one other player I want to highlight in this game is going to be Cade. I think it's Klubnik is how you say his name. Yeah. This is his second year as a starter. He didn't play a lot as a total, I should say, amount of snaps. But I think a 4 or 5-star recruit. And again, if they can't rely on that run game, which it should be the key factor for them, the game might have to be held in his hands to make plays. And again, a tough defense to start against the season against, but he might have to make plays. So this will be an interesting game to see how he's developed in a whole offseason in that offense. I think they have the returning play caller and good weapons on the outside. So if they can't rely on the run game, it might have to lead into his hands. and we will see if he can execute that as well. And the last point I want to make for this game is I think this is probably the for the biggest person in this game. I think this is the biggest game for Dabo Swinney. Last year was the first year I think that they finished with less than 10 wins under his time at Clemson. And, since the kind of changes like over the last few years to the NIL and how college has been moving, they haven't really been successful as they were early in the playoffs when it was pretty much them and Bama, what seemed like every year for the national championship. So interested to see how Clemson performs this year and if Dabo is kind of on the tail end of his run at Clemson, because again, over the last couple of years, they really haven't hit the strides that they wanted to, and they really haven't been back to the mountaintop at all. And I think it's a bit of a disappointing seasons for if you are a Clemson fan, in my opinion. So I think this is probably the most important game for him, just to set the tone for the season. Again, it's number 1 Georgia, and to make a statement as a coach would be to come out and win this football game. That is a huge win on the road, especially in what now is a very much even wide opener ACC after Florida State lost yesterday. So those are pretty much all my takes on the game. Jay, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, one last point. Just looking at the Clemson schedule from last year, I know looking at Clemson and seeing they have 4 losses on the year is not what we're used to seeing over the past 4 or 5 years with Dabo Swinney at Clemson. But 2 notable, they had 2 overtime losses, one to FSU and one to Miami. Yeah. And then they won their last 5 games to end the season. 4 losses is not what Clemson wants, but if you dive deeper into their schedule, they had an overtime loss against number 4 FSU, and then in Miami they lost in double overtime. So those 2 losses probably could have went either way. So I'd expect Clemson to be. I think that's why they're ranked number 14th in the nation. They still have obviously a good squad. Returning quarterback is huge. Yep. So this should be a good game.
Definitely the game to watch. Definitely the best game of the week. Any other thoughts, or do you want to get into the next topic?
Yeah, no, I think I'm good. Let's gamble on sports. So we have actually a decent slate of football on Thursday. I have one pick. This is probably the best game of the day. It's UNC at Minnesota. I'm going to take UNC on the money line against Minnesota. That is the only game pick I have for Thursday, but there are a ton of games, a lot of 30, 40-point favorites. If you're into that, go for it. Moving on to Saturday, West Virginia. Like I said earlier, I think Penn State goes into West Virginia, gets a win, but it's going to be a tight one. I'm going to take West Virginia plus the 9 against Penn State. And then another game there is another bet I have for Thursday. It's North Dakota State at Colorado, over 58.5 points. The Buffaloes make their debut. I'm going to see what that defense is about. They're definitely going to score points. They can score 30, 40 points, but North Dakota State can also score. So I like the over in that game. That game is on Thursday as well. Sorry, the WVU game against Penn State is on Saturday. Moving on to Saturday, Virginia Tech. I'm high on them this season. They go to Vanderbilt. They're 13.5-point favorites. I'm going to take them and the points. Virginia Tech minus 13.5. Alabama minus 30.5 against Western Kentucky at home. Alabama's third string will probably be scoring in the fourth quarter against Western Kentucky. South Carolina minus 20.5 against Old Dominion. I saw my dog just growled at me. South Carolina minus 20.5 against Old Dominion. I think South Carolina is kind of like a sleeper team. I don't think they're going to be like amazing, but I think they will still be competitive in big games. And then there's one game on Sunday. We covered LSU against USC. LSU is 4.5-point favorites. I think they win by probably double digits in this game. Give me LSU minus 4.5.
I think by the time this episode drops, we have NFL next Thursday, or I should say the following Thursday. But we got a good slate of college games. This is the first full slate weekend we have of college football. We do have those 5 games that we picked. We're going to do those on a weekly basis, me and Jay, and we're going to kind of keep track of how we do during the season. We're going to also pick games for NFL each week when we get to that. We will again be dropping every Tuesday and Thursday this week. However, we will only have one episode because we got no NFL, and we just wanted to recap yesterday, and or I said this past weekend, and we're looking forward to this weekend. But we're gonna only have one episode this week, and then we'll come back with 2 for the rest of the season. Appreciate y'all watching. Be sure to follow our socials. They should be in the links in the description or somewhere on our screen at some point. Somewhere up here. I don't know. We'll see y'all next week. Love y'all. Peace out. Get it done.